In order to move on to this bit, I've decided to go in alphabetical order in order to show no favouritism or any way. So, hang on a minute. So, Councillor David Reeve, do you wish to make any representation to the recommended sanctions? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be quick because there's a deal to say. Just to recap on the events. The disclosure itself was just one figure from a spreadsheet of over 8,000 figures and was hardly a state secret, namely experience view of the number of jobs in Guildford in 2013. The main issue is whether the public interest was best served by publishing a report containing that number or by holding it back. The public interest test used by the investigating officer followed guidance from the former Standards Board for England. However, that board was abolished by the Localism Act 2011, which brought in substantial changes, so that guidance is hardly the best available. In my opinion, better and current guidance is available from the Information Commissioner's Office in respect of how the public interest test should be used in the context of the Environmental Information Regulations. These state that to withhold information, a public authority must A. show that the disclosure is more likely than not to have an adverse effect, B. demonstrate that the IP rights holder would suffer harm, and C. needs to provide arguments from the originating third party that the alleged harm will occur. At the hearing, no evidence of such harm was offered. It's difficult to imagine a case in which the balance between the public interest, especially during a public consultation on the local plan, and a de minimis disclosure would lie so obviously on the side of disclosure. So if this case doesn't qualify for the public interest defence, you might like to ponder under what circumstances that paragraph of our Code of Conduct would ever apply. Oh, and by the way, 3 earlier versions of GL Hearn's Schmar disclosed exactly equivalent Experian data, and as far as I'm aware, no one complained on those occasions. Moving to failure to treat others with respect. The Experian data was released to me by the then Head of Planning, Neil Taylor, as an attachment to an email in which he said, and I quote, "It is also worth reiterating that the Council will not be entering into negotiations or discussions on the Schmar methodology prior to the examination of the local plan by the Planning Inspectorate. Should you disagree with the Schmar, you will need to present your evidence to the Inspector at that time." Now, Neil Taylor's email and my reply were both copied to Councillor Spooner. I therefore found it bizarre in the extreme to be accused of being disrespectful to the Council for not discussing my findings internally, when I had already been told by a senior officer, and when Councillor Spooner was aware that I had been told, that the Council would take no notice of them anyway. I find it difficult to find words to describe this ridiculous situation. It is none other than an Orwellian black comedy. Moving on now to bringing the Council or my office into disrepute. In my view, councillors are not best qualified to judge on the issue of bringing the Council or my office into disrepute. Instead, they should be guided by the public reaction. There is no doubt at all that I received extremely strong public support at the hearing, in the local press, and in many comments and emails that were made directly to me, as well as in letters sent to this council by the parish councils. This council exists to serve its residents. It is neither wise nor democratic to ignore their opinions. A couple of general points now. Why did the investigating officer act more like a prosecutor than an investigator? Why has this expensive process taken 15 months? In my opinion, this was largely because Councillor Spooner failed to accept 3 separate offers in writing, 2 from me and 1 from our monitoring officer, Satish Mistry, for a meeting, and also damaged attempts at local resolution by releasing in the local press a letter that seemed to deliberately misrepresent my views. A small thought experiment is also worth considering. If my report had supported the Schmar, would this complaint have ever seen the light of day? Clearly not. So equally clearly it was politically motivated. As such, it ought to have been thrown out according to our rules at an early stage. Looking forward, my take on this whole situation is that we need to bring the Nolan principles into the core of this organisation, because quite frankly, this case shows that we are nowhere near that goal at present. There needs to be a very strong focus on an outward-looking culture rather than on slavish adherence to detailed procedures. I'm very prepared to play my part in helping to make improvements, but attempting to do so by simply crafting ever more detailed procedures is doomed to failure. We need to build an organisation in which officers and councillors are all given the scope to do their jobs to the best of their ability, knowing that the basic principles are much more important than compliance with pettifogging rules. Such organisations are productive, enjoyable to work in, and offer the best chance of satisfying our residents. I submit that I was only doing my job, and finally I would say, if you're not fully informed on the circumstances of this case, in my opinion, you shouldn't vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reeve. Can I now go to Councillor Reeves?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been asked to speak specifically on the sanctions recommended to Council on this case. I understand that Councillor Reeve has already written to Laura Howard, one of our planning policy officers, with an apology. My complaint was simply about the breaching of the Nolan principles by Councillor Reeve, and given that after hours of discussion Councillor Reeve would not agree that the information which he had used was confidential, or it would seem his point at the hearing was that it was only a bit confidential, our only recourse was to a hearing in accordance with our own adopted procedure. But unfortunately it hasn't really resolved the situation. The sanctions as laid down in the Localism Act and adopted by us are not particularly helpful. The Localism Act doesn't appear to have any answers to this, but I would fully support any suggestions that we should review our process. If we are to be in this situation again, we as an authority must put an explanation of the process into the public domain in plain English before any hearing, and make sure that the media are aware of and understand both the nature of the complaint and the process that it will follow. Anything else has been clearly demonstrated just allows misinformation to flourish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Spooner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to focus purely as Councillor Reeve on the sanctions, but I can't let Councillor Reeve get away with some of the things that he says, so I'm going to have to come back on him, I'm afraid. This was a process-driven complaint. It had absolutely nothing really to do with the topic. It's just so happened to be the Shema. Councillor Reeve has clearly forgotten, because it's convenient for him, that he actually called me and asked me to assist him originally in the process of obtaining confidential information or having access to all the information. And following communications, email and oral, with the then Managing Director, and with Satish Mistry, I supported Councillor Reeve obtaining and getting that information, because quite frankly I thought it would be useful to the council, given all the noise that was coming out of the Guildford Green Belt was invalid, that Councillor Reeve did spend some time on it. He clearly spent an awful lot of time on it. What I certainly did not expect was that within 2 minutes he would put it out to parish councils and the press, and frankly treat this council with disrespect. And it was because of that that I raised the complaint. It was not specific to the material that he had obtained, but clearly I expected there to be confidences that he had breached. I believe it's self-proclaimed information, Councillor Reeve, that you've got one item. I've got no way of, and have not bothered to go through and actually check to find out how many breaches of confidence you actually did breach, but your self-proclaimed position is one. One is still more than none. In relation to the process then, as you did ask me, not just by email but also verbally, to assist you, and as I did do that, I would have thought that it would have only been sensible and honest. And the fact that you're now coming up and you've managed, after going through every email possible over the whole period of time, to find one Neil Taylor one, that you try to pin that on all that you did, is ridiculous. In relation to the mediation, Councillor Reeve and I tried our absolute best to get a local resolution to this. You made us sit for 2 hours together, which was quite pleasant, Councillor Reeves, but certainly was a waste of our time, while we went through a formal mediation process, only to find, even with officers, legal officers, drawing up what Councillor Reeves and I thought was a very preferential and helpful document that would enable you to agree without any negative reflection or negative credibility. You chose not to do that. You wanted your day, at the hearing. That was quite clear, and frankly we wasted our time. In relation to the many months that it took, you held up the process for weeks and weeks at times, with going through very closely and attentive discussions with the independent inspector. In fact, Councillor Reeves and I both chased officers to ask them several times, what the hell is going on and why is it taking so long, only to find out that they were still waiting for you to come back and you were still in discussion with the independent investigator. So then trying to pin that on the two complainants is also very sad. You are quite right. I did say to Satish Mistry immediately after the complaint that I saw no reason to see you until an independent investigation had determined the level of the breach. And you, of course, only that amongst many emails and a great trail, that was the one that you chose to bring out when you knew that I was not able to respond because of the process here meant that Councillor Reeves and I were not able to take part in the hearing. And therefore you could say pretty much what you liked. You then dressed it up by saying, in fact, that it was very bad that the complainants couldn't take part. But actually it was quite convenient for you because we were unable at that point to correct the misdemeanours and the misrepresentation. I think I've said enough.
30 seconds.
No, that's enough.
Thank you.